Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to look at Griffith's Chapter 1 and also some of the key terms used in Archer's introduction to the book, which is called Pragmatics. And we're going to look at these particular key terms, and the one we're going to start off with is the idea of language, language as being an ambiguous notational symbolic system. And once we realize that language has this degree of ambiguity built into it, then we can understand the actual nature of pragmatics. So we can look at language as a climb from notational to non-notational, and on the extreme left there you'll see things like mathematical formula, musical notes. And I put language a little bit in, but just there on that notational part of the climb. If you look at the other particular part there, you'll see things like dance, art, photography, sculpture, which are symbolic systems, but they're non-notational. One of the things that we can see with notational and non-notational is the difference in ambiguity. So with mathematical formula, should be no ambiguity. It should be something that's understood from people from throughout the world. We can't argue with 2 plus 2 equals 4. So they're notational systems which really have no ambiguity built into them. And similar, and maybe from a lesser point of view, music as well. So this is a musical note. You play the note. It's either the note or it's not the note. Here's another notational system. This is a La Bande notation. And this is what's used in choreography. So you're actually looking down on the dancer and you're seeing where the legs and the arms should be. So that's another symbolic system, and it's notational. If we look at a non-notational symbolic system, here's a painting. So what we begin to look at here is try and understand some of the things that are going on here. So the woman has got her hands over her face. So is she sad? Is she tired? Is she worried? Has she been peeling onions? We don't quite know, but we can make an interpretation. And then on the table there is a pomegranate. What does that mean? We know that fruits and flowers do have symbolic meaning, but what could it be? So this is a very ambiguous interpretation of this symbolic system. If you know something about Greek mythology, then you'll recognize this as the figure of Persephone. Persephone was taken by Hades down into the underworld, and there made the mistake of eating some pomegranate seeds. And that meant she had to stay for part of the year down in Hades. And in fact, Persephone is the myth of spring. So she spends 3 months of winter down in the underworld, and then she emerges in spring and spends the rest of the time with her mom and dad, who happen to be Zeus and Demeter. Okay, so if you understand that, then of course you'll see there's a lot less ambiguity, but it's still a symbolic system. Okay, so the next particular keywords are the relationship of utterances and sentences. And Griffiths makes a distinction here, which perhaps you might find hard to understand. You probably think of utterances as being something spoken and sentences as being something written. Griffiths tries to make the point that the distinction is not between spoken and written, but it's between something which is real and something which is abstract. So an utterance, according to Griffiths, can be either spoken or written. It's interpreted in context. And here, perhaps the most difficult thing to get your head around is that it's non-repeatable. Because context is always changing. So here's an illustration of it. This is a part from the scene from a movie called Spartacus about the story of a slave revolt in the Roman Empire. And the Romans want to find out who the leader of this revolt is. So they say, hey, come on, tell us who Spartacus is, or if you don't, we're going to kill everybody. So Spartacus, being the great guy he is, says, well, I don't want to have all my followers killed. So he stands up and says, I am Spartacus. Immediately he says, I am Spartacus. Another slave stands up and says, I am Spartacus. And then another slave stands up and says, I am Spartacus. And this goes on and on and on. So I am Spartacus here is not being repeated because every instantiation of the use of that phrase is different. The I, the deictic use of the personal deixis, I, refers to a different person in every particular context. The next set of relationships in terms of keywords is sentence versus speaker meaning. And this is key to understanding the different layers of semantic meaning and pragmatic meaning. So let's take a sentence. The cat sat on the mat. It has a lot of semantic meaning, okay, or sentence meaning. So we can say it's a small furry animal, often kept as a pet, with its back upright, placed its bottom in contact with a natural or artificial material used to cover indoor surfaces or floors. Okay. What's the speaker meaning? Well, we've no idea. It's just a sentence. The cat sat on the mat. The painting is on the wall. The sky is blue. Yeah, I can produce lots and lots of language which is sentence meaning, but what is the communicative value of that? Let's try this one. Thank goodness the cat sat on the mat. Now, what is the speaker meaning? Well, we can guess that the speaker's kind of happy that the cat sat on the mat. And there's an indicator there, the use of thank goodness, which is often called a pragmatic particle. And those pragmatic particles are often used to reveal or help you discover what the speaker meaning is. Here are some more pragmatic particles. Hello, the cat sat on the mat. The cat sat on the mat. Good night. The cat sat on the mat. Yikes. The cat sat on the mat. Finally. Okay, so notice those different pragmatic markers reveal different speaker meanings. Sometimes the speaker is happy, sometimes the speaker is upset about the fact that the cat sat on the mat. Okay, now we come to two of the most difficult terms to get a hold of. The first term there is explicature, and this is a term that's come from relevance theory, Sperber and Wilson. And the other term, implicature, there comes from Grice and the cooperative principle, which we'll be hearing a lot more later. So if we take the sentence meaning, or another meaning for sentence meaning, another word phrase for sentence meaning is literal meaning, we don't actually have a proposition. To get to a proposition, we have to calculate the explicatures. So take a particular sentence like, it's cold here. What does here mean? Is it in this part of the room? Is it in the whole room? Is it in Athens? Is it in Ohio? Is it in the United States? Is it in planet Earth? We don't know. We have to work that one out to get to the proposition. And then what does cold mean? Cold has different senses. It has a physical sense, right? But it also has kind of an emotional meaning as well, an emotional sense. So which one is it? So explicature is the process of working out the ambiguities and the references, enriching the literal or sentence meaning to get to a proposition. So let's say we've got to the proposition. It's cold here, meaning it's physically cold in this particular room. What's the communicative value of that? What's the speaker meaning? Well, here we might be getting to the notion of something that's implied, right? And that's the notion of an implicature. So, for example, perhaps the person is saying, it's cold here, meaning turn on the heater, okay? So that's how we go from explicature to implicature. Here's another example of explicature, okay? And what we're doing here is we're enriching the literal meaning, and we're going through a process of disambiguation. So if you look at the sentence there, he walked to the window and jumped. There's several propositions there that could be extracted from that by working out the explicatures. Probably the most obvious one is this. First he walked to the window, and then he jumped out of the window. Notice I'm enriching it here, right? And maybe that's the proposition you're first thinking about, right? But there are other propositions there. So he walked to the window and jumped, maybe up and down, but not out of the window, okay? Another possible proposition here is that he walked to the window and jumped, but not necessarily in that order, okay? So inferring a chronological sequence to those events is very much the process of working out explicatures and getting to a proposition. Okay, let's move it on and give another example of implicature. Let's take that sentence again and go from the explicature to the implicature. So imagine this is a mafia boss. He's just put a hit on somebody, and he's saying to his hitman, did you deal with Bugsy? And the hitman says, he walked to the window and jumped. Okay, so what's the inference there? What's the implicature? Well, I would presume that the implicature is that, yeah, he's dead. They threw him out of the window. Yeah, he was defenestrated. Okay, here's some more examples of implicature in this, explicature. And this is dealing with prepositions. Prepositions are very indeterminate in terms of their meaning. We have to work out the meaning of a preposition in context. And that process of working out the particular precise meaning of a preposition, okay, is working out the explicature. So a preposition cannot possibly encode the infinite range of all spatial relations, but we have to work it out in context. So let's take a sentence like the clouds moved over the city. When you read that sentence, you're probably going to get a picture in your head of a city and clouds moving. But what exactly is it? There are several particular ways you could conceive, or several different propositions you could extract from this literal meaning. And they're probably dependent upon your experience of cities and your experience of clouds and a particular geographical location of a city that experiences certain cloud conditions. So in the first one, the clouds move from outside to directly over the city. They're just there. Second one, there's a trajection here. The clouds move from outside to directly over the city and then outside again. Imagine a parade of clouds. Here's the third one. The clouds moved around but remain over the city. So they're moving, but kind of a circular motion. So these are all possible propositions or meanings of the word over that we work out according to working out the explicatures. Which is the meaning now? The clouds moved over the wall. Different propositions you're going to extract. The different meaning to over here. What about the cat jumped over the wall? So the listener must use linguistic and non-linguistic knowledge to understand the message. That's what we call dynamic conceptualization. We'll be hearing more about the prepositions over and under later in the course. So we understand that the cat moves above and beyond the wall, not because this is linguistically coded, but because this is the most coherent and reasonable interpretation, given the rough semantic meaning of the proposition, what we know about cats, what we know about jumping, and what we know about walls. And the clouds moved over the city. What do we know about clouds? What do we know about cities? So what we've got to here is kind of three stages of interpretation. We have the semantic meaning, the cat sat on the mat, right? The literal meaning or semantic meaning. And then we have to get to the proposition. And we get to the proposition by working out the explicatures. We need to enrich and we need to disambiguate. So once we've got to that, the proposition, then we can ask, well, what is the communicative value or what is the implicature? So you can see that we have a semantic level and a pragmatic level. Now, we can also add a further level, semiotic or sociolinguistic level to interpretation. And this is the one that we looked at in class. So if you remember, there are three people waiting for a cab, and they say different things when the cab doesn't stop. All right, this is in pre-Uber times. Okay, what we know is that from the particular choice of language here, we make determinations about a person's gender, their socioeconomic status, their age, and education, and lots of other things. So the actual choice of words, of utterances, can also add a level of meaning. And this is all happening in context. And this is certainly on the level of the pragmatic meaning of language. So let's have a look at some definitions then, to try and distinguish between semantics and pragmatics. So semantics is the study of sentence meaning and word meaning. Remember, sentence meaning. Pragmatics is the study of utterance meaning. Pragmatics is concerned with choices among semantic possibilities, and we've looked at various choices in some of the sentences we looked at earlier. A broader definition of pragmatics, which takes into consideration social context, is this one from May. Pragmatics is the study of how language users do things in and with language according to their roles as members of society with regard to the rules and norms that are valid at any time in any place in the community they belong to. So we can begin to see how it's the relationship between a speaker and hearer that often is determining choice of language and is often part of how you begin to understand the meaning of an utterance. 7, compositionality, and this refers to the meaning of a sentence as arising from, number one, the meaning of its parts and the manner in which the parts are put together. So in that sense, we can look at syntax, morphology, phonology, and semantics. So let's take that sentence, you are younger than me, and we can see that it conforms to a classic subject-verb complement structure in English. It has morphology, so those little bits that tack onto words like comparatives, and the object case of I, me, and then copula be. We can look at phonology and look at the stress, the main stress and secondary stress. You're younger than me. And then we can look at the semantic parts of each of those words, and we can go through and look at, give a semantic definition of each of the parts of that utterance. Notice young there, as we discovered, has different senses. And so I've listed some of the different senses there. We've got about 5 different sentences. So when you were trying to work out the explicature of that particular use of young, you have to decide which is the sense that's being used. So if we put all that together into an interaction, A says, want to play baseball, and B says, younger than me, we can see that there's a particular implicature there. So we note that this is a request, and so we take B's response as a refusal, okay? So that's on one level of implicature, and we'll see that there's another level of implicature as well going on here. So we see things in terms of speech acts, request, and is it either acceptance or refusal? If we change the social relationships, okay, we can see that the actual refusal is based on different understandings, right? So in context 1, want to play baseball, and this is younger brother to older brother. You're younger than me. The meaning of young here is inexperienced, right? You're not good enough to play with me. And then if we change the social relationships and it's a child to a father, for example, you're younger than me gets another meaning, another sense of young that is more energetic. Okay? So this is a refusal based on the fact that I just don't have the energy to keep up with you. So notice that the implicature of the refusal is the same, but the actual details of it are different according to the social relationships. And there we are. We're just repeating them. Number one, with the older brother, you're not good enough to play with me. And two, with the father, I haven't got the energy you've got. Okay. Okay, last two more key words and phrases here. This is from Semantics. This is the notion of entailment. An entailment really is a paraphrase. And a paraphrase is one example of a sense relationship. A sense relationship is the way that we understand words in relationships to other words. So if we say Moira has arrived in Edinburgh, that entails Moira is in Edinburgh. Okay, and notice we can't cancel it. We can't say Moira has arrived in Edinburgh and Moira is not in Edinburgh. And that's a key semantic criteria of the notion of entailment, as opposed, as we'll see, explicatures and implicatures can be cancelled, but entailments can't. And finally, the notion of scope. And scope here is the scope of negation. So if you look at the first example there, we have what is called a capability adjective, unbendable. But notice it's ambiguous. In the first sense, it's not able to be bent. So if you think of something like an iron bar, that's unbendable, right? Okay, if you look in the second part, able to be unbent, let's take a paper clip. You can bend it, and then you can unbend it. So notice the parentheses there are marking the shifting scope of the negation. We can see another example of this with I didn't sleep for 2 days. And again, there's an ambiguity here. There are actually two potential propositions. So the first one, for 2 days I didn't sleep. Wow, that's a long time. And then in the second one, it's not true that I slept for 2 days. I slept for three days. So notice the different way that negation is working, and that's the notion of scope. Okay, so that's just a preview of some of the keywords in Griffiths and in Archer et al. And I hope that's going to help you get the most out of the reading.